They shamed Earth at the Galactic Council. Then humanity revoked every treaty. The vote had already been decided before I walked into the chamber. I knew it the moment I stepped through the entrance of the Grand Conclave Hall and saw the Velthari delegate, Sovrath Kell, leaning back in his seat with the kind of ease that only comes from certainty. He was a tall being, his species resembling something between a crane and a diplomat, all long limbs and slow, deliberate movements. He did not look at me. That was the tell. When someone is about to do something to you and they do not look at you, it means they no longer consider you a variable. My name is Mara Solis. I had been Earth's ambassador-at-large to the Galactic Conclave for 11 years. I had sat in this hall through 4 treaty negotiations, 2 border disputes that almost became something worse, and 1 particularly absurd session where 3 species argued for 6 hours about which direction a flag should face. I had learned to read rooms the way sailors read weather, and this room, on this morning, was already a storm. The Conclave Hall was built to impress. It sat at the center of Station Meridian, a neutral orbital platform above the uninhabited world of Kerul, equidistant from the home systems of all 22 member species. The hall itself was a sphere, enormous and open, with tiered seating arranged in concentric rings so that every delegation could see every other. The lighting shifted color by the hour, a design meant to be comfortable for as many biological types as possible. Right now it was a pale gold that caught the iridescent shells of the Rethaki delegates and made them look almost friendly. They were not. I took my seat at the Earth delegation table. My aide, a young man named Owen Fletcher, slid a tablet toward me without a word. I looked at the screen. The resolution was already tabled. Emergency session, special order. That meant no delay, no procedural debate, no time to build a counter-argument through proper channels. Someone had spent considerable effort arranging this to happen fast. The resolution was titled, in the Common Galactic Script, Classification Review of Provisional Member, Earth, Sol System. That language was careful and bloodless, the way all the worst things in politics are. What it actually said, in the technical body of the text, was that humanity was to be formally reclassified as a Grade 0 civilization, primitive, pre-emergent, the kind of designation given to species that had not yet developed interstellar travel, or that had demonstrated themselves to be a danger to the wider community. It was not a demotion, it was an erasure. The evidence package attached to the resolution was a thing of genuine craft. Whoever assembled it had done thorough work. Centuries of recorded human history, curated for maximum effect. The great conflicts of the 20th century. Industrial damage to Earth's oceans and atmosphere. Political violence caught on old cameras. Economic systems that left billions without food, while others accumulated wealth beyond imagination. Every dark chapter we had ever written about ourselves, arranged in sequence, presented without the context of what came after, without the rebuilding, without the sacrifice, without the long and painful and real effort humanity had made to become something different. I read through it quietly while the hall filled. Owen leaned close. "They have the votes," he said. His voice was steady. He was 26 years old, and he had been trained not to show fear in this room. He was doing a good job. "I know," I said. "Do you want me to request a postponement? We could argue procedural." "No." He looked at me carefully. "Ambassador, let it happen," I said. "Take notes." The session opened with the usual formalities. The conclave moderator, a Sulhari named Veth Oren, read the resolution aloud in Common Galactic. The translation system in my earpiece rendered it in English, and I listened to every word as if hearing it for the first time, though I had read it 3 times on the shuttle over. Veth Oren had a careful voice, the voice of someone who knew what they were doing was going to change something, and had decided not to think about that. Sovrath Kell rose to speak in support. He was eloquent. I had always given him that. He spoke about the responsibility of the conclave to protect the stability of the galactic community. He spoke about the pattern of behavior demonstrated by humanity across recorded history. He used the word volatile 4 times. He used the word risk 7 times. He never once raised his voice. He sounded like a doctor delivering a diagnosis, calm and certain, and entirely without malice, which was the most dangerous way to sound when you were doing something like this. 3 other delegations spoke in support. The Rethaki representative read from a prepared statement. The Olvari delegate added their voice with a brief and formal declaration. A smaller species called the Meth Collective, who had barely spoken in session in the 2 years since their admission, stood and gave a careful endorsement that had clearly been written for them by someone else. Then Vethorin turned to me. The Earth delegation has 3 minutes to address the chamber. I stood. The hall was not quite silent. There were sounds, the ambient noise of 22 species breathing and shifting, and existing in the same space, the low hum of the station's atmosphere systems, the occasional soft click of translation equipment. But there was a quality to the attention in the room that felt like held breath. I did not bring notes. I looked at Sovrath Kell first. He met my eyes this time. Now that it was done, he could afford to. "Delegate Kell," I said. "Delegates of the Galactic Conclave, I have listened to the case presented this morning. I have read the resolution. I have reviewed the evidence package in full." I paused. Not for dramatic effect. I paused because what I said next needed to land without anything else attached to it. "I understand, and I have taken note of every species that voted in favor today." Another pause. "That is all I have to say." I sat down. Owen did not move. The hall had gone completely still. Vethorin waited for several seconds before calling the vote, as if expecting me to add something. I did not. The vote was 19-3. 19 in favor of the reclassification. 3 against. The 3 who voted against were the Orenthali, a species of quiet and precise thinkers who had always been careful readers of language. The Karen, who had long memories and longer diplomatic relationships with Earth, and the Drasali, who abstained on principle from any resolution brought under emergency order. 19-3. The resolution passed. Earth was, officially and by record of the Galactic Conclave, a Grade 0 civilization. I stood, gathered my tablet, and walked toward the exit. At the door, Owen appeared at my shoulder. "The shuttle is ready," he said. "Good. Send a secure signal to the fleet coordinator on the permanent record. Tell them to begin the revocation sequence." Owen said nothing for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, with something behind it that I recognized as the first realization of how large this was going to get. "All of them?" I did not slow my pace. All 847. I did not look back at the chamber. There was nothing there I needed to see. The silence in the shuttle should have felt heavy. It did not. Owen sat across from me with his tablet, already pulling data I had not asked for yet, because he was good at his job, and he knew, without being told, that what came next was going to move fast. Outside the viewport, the station grew smaller, its long arms and communication arrays catching the light of Kerul's distant sun, and I watched it shrink until it looked like a child's model, something you could hold in your palm. "The Vaelthari delegation filed a secondary notice," Owen said. "They're requesting Earth vacate its provisional observer status at the Kerul Trade Bureau within 30 days. "Of course they are," I said. "Log it." Logged. He swiped the screen. "We've also received a communication from the Rethaki Economic Liaison. They say they look forward to, quote, continuing a productive relationship with Earth under the new framework." I looked at him. He looked at me. "They think this changes nothing about trade," he said. "They think we'll be embarrassed and compliant," I said. "That's what they've been counting on for 30 years. I turned back to the viewport. The station was almost gone now, just a bright point among the stars. I thought about Sovrath Kell's easy posture in that chair before the session began, the certainty he wore like a second skin. I thought about the Rethaki liaison's cheerful message, the assumption that Earth would absorb the insult and keep delivering. I thought about a man named George Calloway, who had died 12 years ago at the age of 91, who had founded what was known internally as the Long Office, and who had told me at our first meeting, over bad coffee in a government building in Geneva, that the greatest advantage humanity would ever have in this galaxy was that nobody expected us to be strategic. "The revocation sequence," I said. "Where are we?" Owen pulled up the operational screen. "Confirmation received from the permanent record. The legal team activated the first tier 40 minutes ago, while we were still in session. The agreements with automatic dissolution clauses are already lapsed. The ones requiring formal written notice are being transmitted now. Which categories are going first? Infrastructure licensing, jump relay operation permits, the maintenance and access contracts for the 17 human-built relay stations in Rethaki space go dark at midnight tonight, station time." He paused. "Then communications infrastructure. Then the medical compact secondary clauses. Then the arms limitation framework. I nodded. And the Veilthari? Their military supply corridor runs through Waypoint Kessler. That's a human licensed navigation node. The license lapses with the corridor compact, which is Tier 4. Should reach them in about 8 days. 8 days. Sovrath Kell would spend those 8 days feeling very good about himself. Then he would start getting calls. What's the reaction on open channels? I asked. Owen made a small expression, not quite a smile. The Veilthari state media is running a piece about the Conclave's commitment to galactic order. The Rethaki Economic Bulletin describes the session as a clarifying moment in interspecies governance. He scrolled. The Drasali Academic Network has published a short notice describing the resolution as, quote, a procedurally irregular action with unpredictable consequences. He looked up. The Drasali always see things early. They were the only ones who abstained out of principle rather than calculation, I said. Make a note. We treat them differently in the new framework. Noted. He tapped the screen. And the Orenthali? The Orenthali voted against the resolution. They will be fine. I thought for a moment. Send them a quiet acknowledgement. Nothing formal, just so they know we noticed. The shuttle docked with the permanent record 20 minutes later. The ship was enormous from the outside. The kind of scale that stops being abstract and becomes physical when you are standing underneath it in the docking bay, craning your neck to find where the hull ends and the shadow begins. It had been built as a generation ship, one of the early deep space transit designs from before humanity developed reliable faster-than-light travel, later redesigned and repurposed by the Long Office, for a function that had no official name in any public document. The crew knew me. I had spent more time aboard the permanent record than I had spent in my apartment in Geneva over the last 4 years. Captain Delia Crane met me at the bay entrance, a woman of 50 with silver-streaked hair, and the kind of bearing that comes from spending decades in command of something very large. She shook my hand. We got the sequence order, she said. Tier 1 is done. Tier 2 is running. Good. How long until Tier 5? 3 weeks, if we hold to schedule. Tier 5 is the deepest layer. The agreements that nobody in the Conclave even knew existed, because they were filed under commercial shipping subclauses. She walked alongside me as we moved through the corridor. Do you want the full operational briefing now, or after you've slept? Now, I said. She nodded without surprise. She had expected that. Briefing room is ready. Owen fell in step behind us. The ship hummed around us, alive and purposeful, and I felt something settle in my chest that might have been calm, or might have been the specific quiet that comes before something enormous begins to move. George Calloway had described it once. The feeling of a door opening that had always been there and was finally being used. In the briefing room, the screens were already lit. 847 agreements, laid out in a cascade of timelines and dependency charts, each one connected to the next, the way bones connect in a body. Pull one, and the others shifted. Pull enough of them, and the body stopped working entirely. The Rethaki jump relay stations would go dark first. Those relays had been built using human engineering contracts 20 years ago. The operational permits were human-issued. The maintenance protocols were written by human engineers. The Rethaki had upgraded their own systems over the years, added components, made improvements, but the foundational architecture was ours, and the license to run it had just been quietly, legally, completely withdrawn. The relay stations would not explode. They would not shut down dramatically. They would simply stop receiving the authentication signals they required to operate, and the Rethaki trade corridor, which moved roughly 60% of that species' interstellar commerce, would slow to a crawl within 72 hours. I stood in front of the screen and traced the cascade with one finger, following the chain from relay stations to medical compact, to arms limitation framework, to the 17 sub-agreements that branched off the arms compact like roots from a tree. They thought they were punishing us, I said, mostly to myself. Delia Crane stood at my shoulder. They thought they were classifying us, putting us in a box. And they were so pleased with the idea that they never stopped to ask what was already in the box with them. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the Veilthari delegate, Sovrath Kell. He orchestrated this, yes? He is the architect, I said. But he had help. The Rethaki wanted the pharmaceutical leverage gone. The Ulvari wanted the arms limitation lifted against us, to lift it against themselves. Everyone had a reason. Sovrath Kel just gave them a clean way to do it all at once. And now they will spend about 8 days being relieved. Then the first relay goes dark. I stepped back from the screen. And then they will call. Do we answer? I considered this. Eventually, I said, but not immediately. They need to understand what they are calling about before the conversation becomes useful. Owen had been standing quietly by the door. He spoke now, carefully. Some of the species in that vote, the smaller ones, the ones that followed Sovrath Kel's lead, they may not fully understand the consequences of what's coming. The Meth Collective, for example. They barely have interstellar capability. They voted because they were told to. I looked at him. He was right to say it. It was important to say. You're asking if we distinguish, I said. Yes. We do, I said. The cascade is calibrated. The Meth Collective has no infrastructure dependency on anything we're withdrawing. They'll feel none of the pressure. The species that feel this are the ones who benefited from us while voting to diminish us. I looked back at the screen. Justice doesn't have to be blind to be fair. It just has to be accurate. Owen nodded slowly. I turned toward the door. I'm going to sleep for 6 hours. When I wake up, I want updated projections on the Rethaki corridor slowdown, and a preliminary assessment of how the Sulhari medical networks are going to react to the compact lapse. And someone get me a decent cup of coffee. Delia Crane allowed herself a small smile. The coffee situation aboard this ship is, regrettably, unchanged from your last visit. Then we revoke the coffee supplier's contract next, I said. Owen almost laughed. Almost. I walked to my quarters, and behind me the ship moved through space, quiet and enormous, carrying 847 endings toward a galaxy that had not yet begun to understand what was coming. The Rethaki called on the 3rd day. I did not answer. Their lead economic liaison sent a message described as urgent. I let it sit in the queue. On the 4th day, they sent a second message, this one flagged as critical. On the morning of the 5th day, their diplomatic channel opened without announcement, which was technically a breach of Conclave communication protocol, but since Earth was no longer a full Conclave member under the resolution they had voted for, the protocol did not apply to us anyway. I was eating breakfast when Owen brought me the message summary. I finished my meal first. The Rethaki message was frantic in the way that only becomes visible when you read between the careful language of official communications. Phrases like, operational disruption of significant concern, meant that their relay stations were not working, and they had no idea how to fix it. Request for clarification regarding licensing framework, meant that their engineers had discovered the authentication failure, and traced it back to the human-issued permits that no longer existed. Anticipation of continued productive relationship was a very controlled way of saying, please, please, please come back. I composed a reply myself. It was 4 sentences long. It acknowledged receipt of their communication, noted that under the current classification of Earth by the Galactic Conclave, certain operational frameworks had necessarily been revised, expressed our hope that the Rethaki people were experiencing minimal disruption, and informed them that Earth's diplomatic availability was currently limited, but that we would be in contact when scheduling permitted. Owen read it over my shoulder. That is extraordinarily polite, he said. I know, I said. That's the point. The Sulhari called on the 6th day. The Sulhari were not panicking, which was unusual and worth noting. They were a species of considerable composure and long institutional memory, and the message they sent was measured and intelligent. They acknowledged the lapse in the medical compact. They noted that their pharmaceutical distribution networks were already experiencing price volatility in several categories. They did not plead. They simply observed, carefully, that the situation appeared to be creating conditions that were, in their phrasing, suboptimal for all parties. That message I replied to personally, by voice recording, because the Sulhari appreciated that. Ambassador Threnvel, I said, thank you for your communication. You are, as always, precise. The current conditions are indeed suboptimal for a number of parties. Earth remains committed to the health and stability of all species in the galactic community. We will be reaching out to discuss the path forward in due course. I look forward to that conversation. It was the warmest message I sent to anyone that week. Owen compiled the tracker. By day 7, 6 separate species had made contact. By day 8, 9. The Veilthari had not called. Sovrath Kell had not sent a message. I noticed this. The silence from his direction was deliberate and was meant to signal confidence, that the Veilthari were not among those affected, that Kell had calculated correctly and was simply waiting for the lesser species to sort out their difficulties. On the morning of day 9, I called a briefing and asked Delia to put up the star chart. The chart showed the current positions of the 11 Veilthari allied fleet units. I had requested this data 48 hours ago, and the intelligence team aboard the permanent record had compiled it from navigation beacons, commercial shipping logs, and 3 monitoring stations Earth operated under commercial cover that no one in the conclave knew were ours. 3 of the 11 fleet units were refueling at waypoint stations that operated under human-licensed infrastructure agreements. 2 were in transit through navigational corridors that required human-issued clearance certificates to access legally under conclave shipping law. 1 was docked at a repair facility that held an Earth commercial partner contract. 6 of 11. Delia Crane studied the chart for a long moment. He doesn't know, she said. He knows the relay stations have gone dark, I said. He knows about the pharmaceutical disruption. He has probably been told that several species are making contact with Earth. He has been processing all of this as a manageable discomfort, a negotiating position. He thinks we are laying groundwork to return to the table on better terms. He does not know about his fleet. The fleet corridors are deep in Tier 4 and 5. The notices went out by standard mail protocol, bureaucratic timelines. His military advisors have probably received them, but in the Veilthari system, military advisors do not interrupt a senior delegate's morning unless the situation is on fire. I paused. The situation is not on fire yet. Owen spoke from the corner. When does it become on fire? When Tier 5 fully activates and the corridor clearances lapse, I said. In 11 days. At that point, 6 of his fleet units will be in positions they cannot legally sustain under conclave shipping law, without clearances that no longer exist. They can stay where they are and be in violation of the navigational statutes they themselves helped write. Or they can move, which requires routing through uncleared corridors, which requires either violating law or requesting emergency access from the only party authorized to grant it. Nobody said anything for a moment. Which is us, Owen said. Which is us, I confirmed. Delia turned from the chart. They're going to call it a trap, provocation. They'll say we engineered this. We did engineer this, I said simply. The question is whether engineering a response to being publicly reclassified as primitive animals counts as provocation, or whether it counts as competence. I folded my hands on the table. I think most reasonable parties will see the distinction. And Sovrath Kell? Sovrath Kell will call it whatever serves him, but Sovrath Kell is going to have other things on his mind by the time we arrive. Delia straightened. We're going back to the conclave. Yes, but not in the shuttle. I nodded toward the viewport, beyond which the permanent record stretched in all its 14 kilometers of purposeful silence. We go in this. The briefing room held that quiet for a moment. Then Owen, methodical as always, pulled up the transit calculation. 14 days to station approach at standard speed, he said. I know, I said. We leave tomorrow. I want to arrive at exactly the moment Tier 5 activates, not before. Timing matters. He made the note. Delia nodded once, the kind of nod that means understood completely, and moved toward the door to begin the navigation orders. I stayed at the table for a while after they left, looking at the star chart. 11 fleet units, scattered across human-licensed space. 19 delegations that had voted to call us primitive. A pharmaceutical network in quiet distress. Relay stations sitting dark and silent. And somewhere at the center of all of it, a delegate named Sovrath Kell, who had spent 9 days feeling very, very good about himself. I found myself thinking about George Calloway again. The bad coffee. The government building in Geneva. The way he had spread a map on the table between us. Not a star chart, but an old paper road map of Europe, creased and annotated in red pen, and said, Mara, the most important thing you will ever understand about power is that it is not about what you can do. It is about what everyone else believes you might do. Maintain the mystery, and you never have to burn a single thing down. I had been 29 years old. I had thought it sounded like philosophy. It had taken me 20 years in diplomacy to understand it was engineering. I turned off the chart and went to pack for the return journey. The permanent record did not announce itself. That was the first thing that struck every delegation watching the approach on their screens. No hailing signal, no formal identification broadcast, no request for docking clearance. It simply came out of transit at the outer marker of the conclave's approach corridor and held position, all 14 kilometers of it, running its navigation lights in the standard pattern, as if this were an ordinary morning arrival. The size was the communication. You did not need to say anything when you were that large and that quiet. I watched the approach from the bridge with Delia, the conclave station growing slowly on the forward screen from a bright point to a recognizable shape, to the enormous structure I had left aboard a shuttle 2 weeks ago. The station's external communication systems lit up immediately. Requests for identification, requests for docking registration, a formal inquiry from the conclave's security office. Delia let the signals accumulate for 18 minutes before having the communications team respond, and the response was measured and polite and said exactly nothing beyond confirming our ship's registry and noting that we were operating in open space under no treaty or conclave obligation that required us to seek permission for approach. Owen brought me the updated intelligence briefing while we held at the outer marker. The cascade was complete. All 847 revocations had been processed, delivered, and legally finalized. Tier 5 had activated at 0600 that morning, station time. The Velthari fleet corridor clearances had lapsed 3 hours ago. The calls to Earth's communication relay had increased to 47 in the past 24 hours. Sovrath Kel had finally appeared among them. His message had arrived 6 hours ago, and unlike the measured and formal language he usually employed, this one had been sent through 3 different channels, as if he was not certain the first 2 would arrive. He wanted to speak with me. The phrasing had moved from confident suggestion to something that came closer to urgency, though Sovrath Kel was a skilled enough communicator that urgency never fully showed its face, just its shadow. I left his messages unanswered and requested formal docking clearance at the conclave's diplomatic bay, citing the upcoming emergency session I had already filed notice for under Earth's residual observer rights, which the Grade 0 classification had, through a precise and intentional legal argument prepared by Earth's treaty team, actually preserved rather than eliminated, since Grade 0 status under conclave charter technically granted observation rights to any species subject to ongoing classification review. It was the kind of argument that was absolutely correct and absolutely infuriating at the same time, which was exactly how it was meant to be. The conclave granted docking clearance 22 minutes later. They had no legal basis to refuse. We docked at 1400. By 1415, the diplomatic communication system showed 43 separate requests for bilateral meetings with Earth's delegation, all marked urgent, 11 of them from species that had voted in favor of the resolution 19 days ago. By 1430, Veth Oren, the conclave moderator, had sent a personal communication to my terminal, asking whether Earth might be available for a preliminary discussion before any formal session. I replied that I would be happy to meet with moderator Oren at her convenience. She named a time. I accepted. The meeting room Veth Oren chose was small, neutral, and equipped for private conversation, a room used for the kind of discussions that happen before the larger discussions that go on record. She was already there when I arrived, sitting with her hands folded, and the deliberate stillness of someone who had been practicing patience for the last hour. Ambassador Solis, she said. Moderator Oren, I said, and sat across from her. I had brought Owen, who sat to my right and did not speak. Veth Oren was Sulhari, which meant she had the triple-lensed eyes of her species and the characteristic measured speech that never quite sounded like anything other than careful thought. She had been the conclave moderator for 9 years. She was not aligned with the Velthari and had not spoken in favor of the resolution, though her role prevented her from voting either way. She was, in my estimation, one of the more genuinely fair minds in the conclave, which was why she was also one of the more worried people I had seen in a long time. I will not pretend this is a courtesy call, she said. I did not expect you to, I said. The situation is developing in ways that are causing significant concern among several member species. She paused. The relay disruption in Rathaki space has now caused cascade failures in 2 adjacent trade corridors that were not directly subject to any of Earth's revocations, because those corridors depend on Rathaki infrastructure that depends on Earth's relay architecture. I see, I said. The pharmaceutical volatility is being felt in 17 systems. 3 of them do not have alternative supply chains at any cost that is accessible for ordinary populations. I held her gaze and said nothing. And I am receiving communications from the Velthari Military Affairs Office, she said carefully, indicating that there are navigational clearance issues affecting several fleet units, whose current positions and transit options are constrained in ways they describe as requiring resolution. That does sound complicated, I said. Veth Orin was too experienced to let frustration show, but something moved behind her eyes. Ambassador, I need to understand what Earth's intentions are. Our intentions are straightforward, I said. Earth was classified as a Grade 0 civilization by a vote of this conclave 19 days ago. We accepted that classification. We then conducted ourselves accordingly by revising our operational commitments to reflect our new formal status in the galactic community. We are not a full member. We are not bound by the treaty obligations that govern full members. We are simply a species operating legally within the space we occupy. You are doing more than that, she said quietly. We are doing exactly as much as we have always done, I said. The difference is that we are no longer choosing to provide services and infrastructure to parties who formally voted to declare us primitive. I let that sit. That seems like a reasonable adjustment. Veth Orin was quiet for a moment. Then, what does Earth want? I had been waiting for that question. A session, I said. A formal, recorded session of the full conclave. Not emergency order, not special classification. A regular session. I would like to address the membership. You would like to negotiate. I would like to speak, I said. Whether what follows is a negotiation depends on the conclave. She nodded slowly. I can arrange a session for 3 days from now. That would be acceptable. She started to stand. I spoke again. Moderator Orin. One more thing. I waited until she looked at me directly. The 3 days before the session. The Velthari fleet clearances. I would appreciate it if you communicated to Delegate Kell that Earth is willing to extend provisional operational clearance to his fleet units during this period, as a gesture of goodwill. She studied me. You are not required to do that. No, I agreed. I am choosing to, because I want it to be clear, before I walk into that session, that everything we have done has been a choice, not a weapon, a choice. I let her hear that. We made choices when we joined this conclave. We made choices when we abided by 847 agreements for 30 years, and we made a choice 3 weeks ago. I want Delegate Kell to understand that what comes next is also a choice. I stood, and that the choices are ours. Veth Orin looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, understood. The session was set. The hall looked different this time, not physically. The sphere was the same, the tiered seating, the pale shifting light, the ambient sounds of 22 species arranged in their centuries-old formation. But the feel was different in the way that a room feels different when the balance of attention has changed, when the people sitting in it are no longer sure of themselves. I noticed it the moment I walked through the entrance. Delegations that had always carried the easy posture of permanent majority now sat differently, with a watchfulness that was almost unfamiliar on some of those faces. The Rathaki delegates were still. The Sulhari economic advisor was consulting a tablet with the focused speed of someone managing an ongoing crisis, while trying to appear as though they were not. And Sovrath Kell, in his seat at the Velthari delegation table, was looking directly at me this time. He had been looking at me since I entered the room. He did not stop. I took my seat. Owen placed a single tablet in front of me. On it was one document, 11 pages. Veth Orin opened the session. She described it as a regularly scheduled full membership assembly, which was technically true, and which also meant that everything said in this room today would go into the permanent record of the conclave. That mattered. I had requested it. Every word today would be documented, archived, and available to any historian, journalist, academic, or species that wanted to understand exactly how this moment unfolded. She introduced me as a representative of the Earth delegation, and I stood and walked to the floor podium. The hall was very quiet. I did not begin with a greeting. I did not begin with a reference to the resolution or the vote, or the 3 weeks that had passed since. I began with a simple, plain statement of fact. and I kept my voice level and clear. In the 30 years since Earth joined this conclave as a provisional member, we built 17 interstellar relay stations that now carry 62% of total galactic commerce. We developed and licensed the base compound architecture used in 439 pharmaceutical products currently distributed across 1,100 inhabited systems. We wrote the navigation protocol that governs faster-than-light transit routing for 14 of the 22 member species. We designed, constructed, or provided critical technical components for 23 station facilities, including this one. I did not pause for effect. I continued at the same pace. We did these things willingly. We did them because we wanted to be part of this community. We did them because we believed, and we still believe, that shared infrastructure and mutual dependence create peace. We did them because the people of Earth, who have had more than enough of conflict in their own history, chose to build rather than to take. I paused then. Not long. 3 seconds. 19 delegations in this chamber voted 3 weeks ago to classify humanity as a Grade 0 civilization. The evidence cited was our history, our conflicts, our failures, everything we have ever done wrong, presented as the sum of what we are. I looked across the room slowly, not at any single face but at the whole of it. You did not cite what we had built here. You did not cite what we had shared. You did not cite the 30 years we spent contributing to this conclave without ever once asking for the security seat we qualified for under charter. Because we did not want to create friction. We were patient. We chose to be. I let that settle. And you voted to call us primitive. The room was absolutely silent. I am not here to argue the resolution, I said. It passed. It is in the record. It stands. I looked at Sovrath-Kel directly. What I am here to do is introduce a new framework for Earth's relationship with the galactic community, one that reflects our actual status, rather than our patience. I picked up the tablet from the podium. Earth's new compact with the Galactic Conclave is 11 pages. Previous agreements averaged 450 pages. We have simplified considerably. I set it down. It establishes Earth as a full Security Council member, the first new seat granted in 200 years, which we are entitled to under the charter criteria that we have met for the past decade, and which this conclave declined to act on through procedural delay. I was still looking at Sovrath-Kel. He did not look away. It reestablishes operational relationships for relay infrastructure, pharmaceutical licensing, and navigation protocol access, under revised terms that include transparent pricing for services that were previously provided below market value as a goodwill gesture. I heard movement from the Rethaki table. I did not look over. It does not include the arms limitation clauses from the previous framework. A beat. Earth chose to observe those limitations. We made that choice. The choice is no longer operative. Sovrath-Kel's expression did not change. He was very good. Finally, I said, the compact includes a formal record of the intelligence assessment Earth's diplomatic and research teams have compiled over the past 30 years, covering trade irregularities, undisclosed agreements, and other activities conducted by conclave members in ways inconsistent with their stated positions. That record is attached as an appendix. It is sealed at present. It remains sealed as long as the new compact is honored. Now the room moved. Not loudly. No voices. Just 100 species shifting in their seats at the precise moment when the meaning of that sentence arrived. Sealed as long as the compact was honored. I want to be very clear, I said. And for the first time I let something into my voice that was not pure calm, not anger. Something quieter than that. Something that came from a long way back. Earth does not want leverage. We did not build this position because we wanted to hold something over anyone. We built it because 30 years of goodwill diplomacy was answered with a public declaration that we are animals. I stepped back from the podium. Not dramatically. Just a small step, the way you step back when you are finished with something. We are choosing to offer this compact. That is the same capacity for choice that was used to classify us, and the same capacity for choice that built every relay station and pharmaceutical compound in that documentation. We choose. That is what we have always done. I picked up the tablet. The compact is open for signature. I will be available for bilateral discussion over the next 48 hours. The permanent record will be holding position at the outer marker until we depart. I walked back to my seat. Veth Oren called for a recess. In the movement and sound that filled the hall, Owen leaned close and said, very quietly, 7 delegations have already requested bilateral meetings. The requests came in during your address. Which 7? I asked without looking up. He read the names. All 7 had voted in favor of the resolution. I took the tablet from him and began reviewing the schedule, and the hall moved around us, loud with the sound of a galaxy reorganizing itself. The first bilateral meeting was with the Sulhari. They had requested the earliest possible slot, and I gave it to them because Veth Oren was Sulhari, and because they had always been among the more honest players in the room, which in diplomacy means they were honest when it served them, and also sometimes when it did not. The Sulhari delegation lead was a tall, precise being named Aren Thos, their senior trade minister, who arrived with 2 advisors and a prepared brief that he clearly expected to use. He set it on the table between us, and then, after a moment, turned it face down. That was interesting. Ambassador Solis, he said, the pharmaceutical situation. Yes, I said. 3 systems, he said. 3 systems, where the population does not have access to adequate alternative supply chains. These are not high-income worlds. They cannot absorb the price increase that the compact lapse has created. I held his gaze. He was not wrong. And he knew that I knew that he was not wrong, and that I had known it before I filed the revocation. What do you propose? I asked. Emergency provisional restoration of the medical compact clause for those 3 systems specifically. Humanitarian basis. I looked at him for a moment. Then I turned to Owen, who pulled up the relevant documentation without being asked, and I reviewed the 3 systems in question. I had reviewed them before. I knew their populations, their existing medical infrastructure, their import dependency ratios. Humanitarian restoration, I said. No cost recovery, provided immediately, outside the compact negotiation. Arn Thos stared at me. He had expected a negotiation. He had prepared for a negotiation. You are agreeing. I am agreeing, I said. Those 3 populations did nothing to warrant being caught in this. The Sulhari delegation voted for the resolution, but the people living in those systems did not. We can separate the 2. I turned to Owen. File the provisional restoration with our treaty team, effective immediately. Owen nodded and stepped away to make the transmission. Arn Thos sat very still. Then, I was told to expect that this would be difficult. It is not difficult, I said. It is just expensive for us, and necessary for them. Earth can absorb the cost. I leaned forward slightly. What would be difficult, Arn Thos, is if this conclave concluded from this conversation that Earth uses medical access as a weapon. We do not. That is not what we are. I held his gaze. We are the species that built the medicine in the first place. We did it to help people. We still want to help people. We want to do it under an arrangement that treats us as what we actually are. He was quiet for several seconds. Your species is not what the Velthari resolution described. No, I said. We are not. He looked at the face-down brief on the table. I did not vote for the resolution personally. I am not on the delegation council. I know, I said. But you're here now. That matters too. The Rethaki meeting was harder. Their lead diplomat, a being named Korva Sel, was experienced and defensive and arrived expecting to be lectured. Instead, I went through the relay restoration framework with him, item by item, calm and technical, and by the end of the 2nd hour, he had stopped expecting a lecture and started asking genuine questions about the revised licensing structure. The pricing was higher than before. I explained why, and I did not apologize for it. He did not ask me to. The Orenthali came not to negotiate, but to say something. Their representative, a quiet and serious being named Pel Marath, sat down and said, "We want the record to show that we voted against the resolution, because we read the charter language carefully, and believed the classification was unjustified by the documented criteria. We did not vote against it as a favor." "I know," I said. "That is why I respected it. We also want to say," Pel Marath continued, "that your civilization's response has been studied by our academic community with considerable interest. The precision of the revocation cascade, the timing, the absence of any explicit threat." They paused. "It is a very human way of doing things." I thought about George Calloway and the paper map of Europe. "What do you mean by that?" I asked. "We mean," Pelmarith said carefully, that your species appears to have concluded a long time ago that the most effective demonstration of power is the one that requires the other party to explain to themselves why they feel afraid, without being able to point to any specific threat. They tilted their heads slightly. It is technically non-violent. It is also more effective than anything violent would have been. We did not want to frighten anyone, I said. No, Pelmarith agreed. You wanted to be understood. The fear is a side effect of the understanding. They stood. We look forward to working with Earth under the new compact. I believe it will be one of the more interesting diplomatic relationships in the coming century. Sovrath Kell came last. He did not send his delegation. He came alone, which was either a power move or a sign of something else. He sat down without the usual Veilthari formal opening and looked at me across the table with the eyes of someone who had spent 3 weeks recalculating. The appendix, he said. The sealed intelligence record. Yes, I said. You will keep it sealed. As long as the compact is honored, I said. Yes. He was quiet. I let him be. He was working through something, and I did not need to help him do it. The corridor clearances, he said finally. My fleet units will be fully restored under the new navigation framework when the compact is signed, I said. They have provisional clearance in the meantime. They are not in any danger. He studied me. You are not angry, he said. It seemed to genuinely confuse him. I was never angry, I said. Anger is what you expected. It is the emotion that fits the story you told about us. The volatile, primitive species, the one that would react, escalate, confirm the narrative. I kept my voice even. We did not do any of those things. No, he said. You did not. We were strategic, I said simply, which is apparently surprising. He looked at the table for a long moment, then he said, the face-saving arrangement, the one you offered Moderator Oren the night before the session. A public position for the Veilthari that does not reflect private concessions. It stands, I said. You can present the new compact to your government as a renegotiation you initiated. The terms benefit Veilthari interests in several areas if you look at the infrastructure sections. I made sure of that. I paused. I did not build this to humiliate the Veilthari. I built it to create a structure that holds. Structures that humiliate people do not hold. He was quiet for a long time after that, long enough that I began to wonder if the meeting was over. Then he said, How long have you been planning this? I considered the question honestly. Some of it was planned 30 years ago, I said. Some of it was planned last week. Most of it was built piece by piece by a lot of people who believed that patience was worth more than speed. I thought of the long office, of the briefing rooms and the late nights and the quiet decades of work that had no obvious output and no public credit. It is not a comfortable way to operate, but it is effective. He stood. He did not offer the formal Veilthari acknowledgement of a concluded meeting. He simply said, I will recommend the compact to my government. I know, I said. He left. Owen appeared from his position near the door, where he had been standing for the entire meeting. That's all of them, he said. Not all, I said. The Karen haven't come by. They sent a message instead, he said. They said, and I'm quoting directly here, we always knew. We're glad you're still you. I looked at the tablet for a moment. Then I set it down. Send them a reply, I said. Tell them we always knew too. The vote took place on the 48th hour, 21 in favor of annulling the resolution and approving Earth's full Security Council membership, 1 against, a small Veilthari proxy state with no meaningful leverage, and a delegate who had apparently not received the message that this outcome was already arranged. Veth Oren read the result into the record, and I stood in the chamber and let the pale gold light fall across the room and thought about what it meant to be patient for a very long time, and then to finally, quietly, step forward. I thought about what Pelmarith had said, that the fear was a side effect of the understanding. That seemed about right. The permanent record departed the following morning, ahead of schedule. I stood on the bridge with Delia Crane and watched the conclave station shrink in the viewport, the same way I had watched it 3 weeks ago from the shuttle, until it was a bright point, and then nothing. The signed compact is in the archive, Delia said. Good, I said. The intelligence appendix is still sealed. It should stay that way, I said. Hopefully for a very long time. She nodded. And contingency theta? I thought about the sealed file I had opened the night before in my quarters, the one that had been prepared 18 months ago by the long office team, the one that described, in careful and precise language, the plan for what would happen if the new compact was ever violated. I had read the first 2 pages. Then I had closed it and put it back. Contingency. Theta stays sealed, I said, for now. Delia accepted that without further question, because she was Delia Crane, and she understood that some things were most powerful when they remained unopened. The station disappeared entirely. Stars filled the viewport. You know, Owen said from behind us, not looking up from his tablet. The Valthari economic projections under the new compact actually favor them in the long run. The revised infrastructure terms are genuinely better for their outer systems than the old framework was. I know, I said. They got a better deal than they had before, even after everything. Yes, I said. He looked up. Was that the plan? The plan, I said, was always to build something that lasts. You cannot build things that last on the foundation of making someone feel defeated. You can build them on the foundation of making someone feel they chose correctly. I turned from the viewport. Sovrath Kell will tell his government he renegotiated. Some of his people will believe him, some will not. But the compact will hold because it is genuinely useful to them, and that is worth more than being right about who started it. Owen thought about this. That is a very patient way of thinking. Yes, I said. It is. We are not a species that moves fast. We never have been. We argue, we doubt, we build and burn and rebuild again. We carry our failures in the public record and argue about them for generations. We are, by almost any objective measure, difficult, complicated, exhausting even to ourselves. But we are patient, and we plan, and we build things meant to outlast the people who build them. The galaxy spent 30 years assuming that made us weak. I sat in a hall and listened to 19 delegations vote to call us primitive, and I walked out without raising my voice. And 3 weeks later, the structure we had quietly assembled over 3 decades turned out to be the architecture everything else depended on. That is not weakness. It has never been weakness. It is just a very human way of being strong. Somewhere behind us, the Galactic Conclave was already adjusting to the new compact, already finding its way into the shape of the framework I had written in 11 pages. Somewhere, the relay stations were coming back online. Somewhere, pharmaceutical prices were beginning to settle. Somewhere, Valthari fleet commanders were filing updated clearance paperwork and probably choosing not to think too hard about what that meant. And in a sealed file in the archive of the ship around me, Contingency Theta waited quietly, patient as anything we had ever built, ready for a day that I hoped would never come. We moved through space toward home. We had chosen this, every single part of it. And that, more than anything else we had ever done, was the thing the rest of the galaxy was going to have to learn to live with.
He missed. Tiny, you let that little ass nigga get the rebound?
I'm on his dumbass fucking mascot, bro.
Yup. Clam City. Clam City. Shit, go ahead. Go ahead then. Oh my god. I got scared. Alright, hold on. Oh shit. Let me find out. Hey. Hold on. Oh. Oh my. Hold on. 5 seconds. Overdose. Come on. Bro, I'm finna make my player like dark as shit because like I can't see my mask. Like, do you notice I have the mask on? Yes, Tiny. Board. Oh, if he wouldn't have out, he would have passed it. I would have stole the ball. I would have stole it right there. That's a steal, 2K. That's a steal, bro. Oh yeah. Oh shit, hold on. I'm here, yeah. If he bites. Yeah, hey, every time he bites, just swing that and I'm knocking it down.